So, how do we even begin to make sense of these huge, complex issues like climate change? Well, the source material we're looking at today suggests that maybe, just maybe, we're using the wrong tool. It's like we're using a microscope, zeroed in on just the last few decades. The author argues that what we really need is a telescope, a long lens, to look way, way back through centuries, millennia, and even millions of years. Let's see what that long lens reveals.
And this quote right here, it's really at the heart of the whole discussion. It comes from a Native American speaker in Vermont, and it just perfectly sets up the central question. When the environment changes, is the right response to sound the alarm or to adapt? It's a pretty powerful starting point for rethinking the whole thing.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The source describes a talk happening at a private school in Vermont. The speaker casually mentions that she used to skate on Lake Champlain when she was a kid, but now the lake just doesn't freeze most winters. Now, what's so fascinating is how that one simple observation triggered two completely different, almost opposite reactions in the room.
This slide just lays out that split perfectly. On one side, you have the teacher's reaction. The source says they immediately went to a place of guilt, feeling personally responsible for this very modern crisis. But then, on the other side, you have the speaker. She takes a totally different path. She reframes the whole thing, not as an issue of personal blame, but as part of a much bigger story, a story of human resilience.
And this is where the perspective just completely shifts. Instead of looking at her own 50 or 60 years of life, the speaker zooms the lens way out to the incredible 12,000-year history of her tribe, right there in that same region. And you know what? Changing the timescale changes, well, everything. 12,000 years. That's the number that matters here. The text points out there's archaeological proof that her ancestors have lived there, without interruption, since the end of the last major global warming event, the end of the Ice Age. So think about that. This isn't a story about surviving a few warm winters. This is about surviving a total transformation of the planet, from a world of ice to a world of forests. And this just brilliantly shows you the scale of that change. We are talking about an ice sheet, 2.5 miles thick, that used to cover that whole area. I mean, that's just massive. And when that melted, her ancestors didn't panic. They adapted. It really puts a single lake not freezing into a whole new perspective, doesn't it? But what if we zoom out even further? The source connects this story to a 2024 study from the journal Science. And this study didn't just look back 12,000 years. Oh no, it looked back 485 million years. And what that deep history shows is, well, pretty startling.
So the source uses this study to make a really interesting point. It says that for most of the last 500 million years, Earth was actually way warmer and CO2 levels were much, much higher. From that huge perspective, the big drop in CO2 is a pretty recent thing, geologically speaking. It suggests that our current era, even with all the recent warming, is actually part of a much longer, colder period in the planet's history.
So, here's the big takeaway from all this deep history. When you pull the lens back this far, the author argues we're not actually in a heat wave. We're in a planetary cold spell. Now that is a jarring idea that really challenges the notion that warm is some kind of a natural state for Earth. Okay, so the obvious comeback to all this is, sure, the climate has changed before, but it's the speed of the change today that's the real problem. And the source does get into that, but not with more data. Instead, it points to a really curious pattern in how some very well-informed people behave. This is the provocative question the author puts on the table. They point out what they see as a major contradiction. On the one hand, you have these urgent public warnings about catastrophic sea level rise. But on the other hand, you have the private, long-term investment choices of some of the richest people in the world. The source brings up these specific multi-million-dollar properties, all bought right on the coast. And the implied question is pretty clear. If the people with access to the absolute best data and financial advice truly believed these properties would be underwater soon, would they be making these kinds of 30-year investments? The source suggests that maybe their actions are telling a different story than their words. And that whole observation about investments brings us right back to the central idea here. This really isn't just about climate change. It's about a fundamental mistake the source claims we're making in how we look at almost every big issue today. We've lost the long lens. We have no historical depth. The author uses this really powerful metaphor. Think of our understanding as the tree. That historical perspective, the long lens, that's the root system. And without those deep roots, Well, our judgments are fragile, our solutions are shallow, and as the author puts it, our efforts can become nothing more than vanity and useless agitation. And here are some real-world examples of how this plays out. In politics, we blame the person in charge right now for systemic problems that have been brewing for decades. In world affairs, we ignore 1,000 years of history and just focus on yesterday's headline. And in climate, well, we judge a 4.5 billion-year-old planet based on a tiny, tiny sliver of recent time.
And this right here is the ultimate takeaway. Using the long lens doesn't mean we just ignore today's problems. Not at all. It means we change our approach to them. According to the source, it shifts our focus away from short-term panic and toward long-term strategies, things like resilience and adaptation and durability, exactly what that speaker in Vermont was talking about. And that's really the final thought this source leaves us with. It's a challenge, right? What if we applied this long lens not just to climate, but to our economies, to social issues, even to our own personal lives? What would change? You have to wonder, what crises that feel so urgent today might actually just be cycles that we're fully equipped to adapt to? It's definitely something to think about.